Key Concept 2.2 is mostly about the growth of empires and what happened with them and how they were competing for resources and land, and basically that caused them to interfere with one another. The first Roman numeral is about just how they grew and that they had new rulers and what those new rulers did. The second Roman numeral is about the new forms of government based from those empires and on what those leaders did, and they sort of based those forms of rule on what they were doing before. So if something like worked for them before as a political rule, then they would keep that and implement more things like that, or maybe if it didn't work, they would do something else. The third Roman numeral is about the social aspect of these empires and how that would also affect the economic part of their empires. So social classes and economic classes were very close because if you were in a certain social class, you'd have to, say if you were in the lowest class, if you were a slave, you'd have to work to produce food for the higher classes, things like that. And then the fourth and final Roman numeral is about how those empires collapsed and what happened to make them collapse, such as invasions from other groups and other dynasties and empires, or just other tribes, and then sort of internal problems like the division of rich and poor. There are a lot of peasant revolts and things like that. These are just some vocab terms. The first Roman numeral is basically about just the empires that were there and where they were and what they were about. For the second Roman numeral, it's about the types of government and things that have to do with those types of government. Third one is about the social and economic dynamics, so things like the social classes and just economic stuff, like if you were a slave, you produced labor, or like the tributary states gave tributes to the government. And the last Roman numeral is about the groups that caused internal struggles and the groups that invaded and caused the fall of empires. Primary documents for 2.2. The first one we have the Mandate of Heaven. It's about how Chinese government ruled, and the Law Book of Manu, which is from it's about the Hindu code, which affected the governments in India and what they did. For 2.2, for the second Roman numeral, it's more about government and how their beliefs affected government and what the government did in that time. And for the third one, it's more about social hierarchy and patriarchy and just how that fit into that society and how that also worked with economics. And for the last one, it's just about the fall of the empires and what caused them. The helpful videos, this first one's about the Persians and Greeks, because they were both empires of that time. They were both expanding empires. Second one is about China and Chinese government and how that was executed. And the third one is about Buddhism and basically about the Mauryan and Gupta empires and their society. And the fourth one is about the Roman Empire and how that fell and what caused that again. Evidence for the first Roman numeral is the first one are the terracotta warriors, and that's from the Qin dynasty in China at that time. The first empire had terracotta warriors made, and that was just something that happened during that time. And Ashoka from the Mauryan Empire had stupas made for Buddhism, and just to promote that. That was also something that happened during that time and during that empire. The second Roman numeral shows forms of government and things that they did, such as Rome had public meetings and town meetings, I think, and that affected their government just then. And Persia had satraps, which were like governors now, and they had regions, and they ruled over those regions for the people in those regions. For the third Roman numeral, both of these images, you can see social systems and how they sort of contributed to economic systems. For the first one, in Rome, at first only upper-class citizens could be a member of government, and this sort of caused the laws about economics to be in their favor, because if you were in government and you were rich, you wouldn't want to pay taxes, even though it would probably be fair that you pay more taxes. That didn't happen. So they taxed the poor a lot more than they would tax the rich, because the rich had more say in government, which created the greater divide between social classes. And then the second one is more about slavery and unpaid labor, because that was the very bottom of the social class, and that also affected it because slaves would be forced to produce food for the higher classes. So it would affect it both socially and economically. For the last Roman numeral, you can see evidence of what caused the fall of these dynasties. For the first one, you can see a Hun invasion, and those caused sort of external pressure, and you'd have to build up your military, and even so they would come and take the land, and that would cause their empire to collapse. And then the second one would be peasant rebellions, like the Yellow Turbans. The Yellow Turbans were a peasant rebellion in the Han Dynasty in China, and they had economic problems, and the Yellow Turbans were a type of peasant revolt, and it partly caused the fall of the Han Empire. These maps are just regions that were affected, and just places that were affected by these things in this time period. And that is all.